I would say good morning. It is incredible schos Baruch Hashem to be able to be here with all of you today. And the great schos Baruch Hashem. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but at least to be together virtually is a tremendous, tremendous zechus. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, dedicating all the Sherman Drashos this year as a zechus for Besoros Tovos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Av, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, Stephen Wendy Drazen, in honor of Israel Drazen, Dina Drazen, Stanley Rosenzweig, Zichron Lebracha, and Eileen Rosenzweig. Our week of learning sponsors, David and Wendy Hefter, in honor of David Hefter's 54th Bar Mitzvah anniversary. Incredible. Having Daniel Hefter and Orly Olbaum in shul to celebrate their engagement, Mazel Tov. And welcome to David's nephew, Isaac, and his wife, Gitti, and their children, Yishai, Nama, and Ora, visiting from Eretz Yisrael. Dr. Ed and Faith Wolf, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Dr. Wolf's father, Cyrus Wolf Shalom, Ben Tzvi Hirsch, Zichron Levracha, and Nathan and Beth Adler, in memory of their father, Ben Adler, Hachaver, Baruch Mordechai, Ben Moreno, Rav Nosson, Zichron Levracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshama Slav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, all those who know Refuah Shavim together, the Kol Choli Yisrael, Kodesh Baruch Hu Shemir Hashem, bring home our hostages, B'Shalom and B'Karav, and allow our holy soldiers to be successful. B'Chol Ma'aseh Yedehem. Moshe, we are beginning today's daf is Samech Aleph 61, and we are picking up at the Mishnah on Samech Aleph Amud Aleph, top of the daf. Ashkech to Yehuda Neuberger for giving daf Yomi on Shabbos and yesterday on Sunday. And Baruch Hashem, let's begin. Hametar Yino Shal Ovei Kochavim. So we've spoken about already this case in yesterday's daf. This is a situation where a Yisrael is producing wine for an akum. This one for an akum. Rashi points out over here, Sha'asal bekashrus. So the Yisrael, the Jew, made the wine, and he made kosher wine, lemochro the Yisrael. And the intention of the wine, ultimately, again, is to use it to sell it to another Jew. V'lo nasan damim achshav la'ovei kochavim ad shim karenu. So again, the way this situation works is like this. Essentially, the akum goes ahead and provides all of the materials. The Jew has not yet paid the akum anything. Payment usually comes after the sale of the wine. So really, everything belongs to the akum being produced almost like under hashkacha by the Jew. The Jew has not paid for anything yet. So now the Rashi points out, he says, so after the Yisrael has gone and produced the wine, so he leaves it in the domain of the akum. Okay, so obviously now we understand what's the tension. The tension is, so what's going to be the status of this wine, given the fact that although it's made by a Jew, and therefore the pashtos, it's kosher, but at the end of the day, it is in the domain of an akum. So how does that impact the ongoing kashrus status of the wine? So what's the halacha? So the Gemara says like this. So again, assuming that we're talking about a home that opens up into the public thoroughfare, which means other people could see what's happening inside of the house. So as long as it's a city in which there are Jews and non-Jews, the wine is going to be mutter. What's the pshat? Take a look at Rashi. Mutter. The mirsasle oved kochavim v'lo naga. Because interestingly enough, the Oved Kochavim himself is going to be nervous. In other words, what do we have to be concerned about over here? Let's just analyze this. So the wine, ingredient-wise and process-wise, is kosher because it was made by the Jew. It's now been deposited back with the akum. So of course, the concern we have is that the akum is going to touch the wine. So the Mishnah says like this. If the place where the akum's home opens up into Rosh Hashanah, so people could see, which means if the akum touches the wine, people will see him touching the wine, then the wine is mutter. The wine is permitted. What's the logic? Zak Rashi, and the end of the first short line in Rashi, mutter. The mirsasle oved kochavim v'lo naga. The akum is going to be too nervous. He's not going to touch the wine. Why? The Amar Dilma Chazuli Hanachi so the Ari B'Sharabim Umafsinda Vafilu In Mafteach V'Chosem Shari V'Hu She'ein Lo Klum Al Osa Yayin Kigon Shekasol as Kabati. So interestingly enough, okay, we'll define more of the parameters of this in the Gemara, but the point of it is like this: as long as the akum's home is visible from the Rosh Hashanah, and this is a city in which there are Jews and non-Jews, the akum in whose home the wine is deposited is not going to touch the wine. Why is he not going to touch the wine? Because he's going to figure like this: I'm going to touch it, or I'm going to shikshech, I'm going to stir it around, do a little libational activity, and someone's going to see me. And then if someone sees me, I lose out on the opportunity to sell it to the Jewish market. So therefore, again, mirsis means he's fearful of being discovered. He's fearful his libational activity will be discovered, and therefore he doesn't do it. That's the first part. Be'ir shakula ovdei kochavim aser. But if the akum lived in a city, now all of this presupposes that there are Jews who are passing by. If, of course, the akum lives in a city where there are only non-Jews, then this whole equation goes out the window because then obviously no one's going to see him, or whoever sees him, it's not really going to matter, and therefore the wine is usher. Ad sheyeshev u'mishamer. Ultimately, again, unless of course the Jew goes ahead and appoints a shomer. If he appoints a guard to be there, right, to ensure that the akum doesn't go ahead and touch the wine, then the wine could remain mutter. Ve'ein hashomer tzarach lios yoshev u'mishamer af al pi shu yotze v'nichnas mutter. But interestingly enough, the shomer doesn't just have to sit there the entire time. Rather, the shomer ultimately, again, is able to be what we call yotze v'nichnas, go in and go out. Again, we'll define the parameters of that as well. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Rishus Ovdei Chochavim Achasi. Shimon Elazar says the domains of an akum are all one. So Rashi already points out, we have no idea what is Rabbi Shimon Elazar. What is he adding? What is he saying? Okay, to be determined. Let's see next. So same case. A Jew, I'm a Jew. Baruch Hashem, I'm a Jew, and I go ahead and I make wine. Now, again, remember, same case before. The akum is supplying all the materials, which means he really owns the wine, but I'm making it in a way that could be sold to other Jews. Once again, the wine, after it's finished, is being deposited with the akum. It's an interesting case. In this case over here, the akum goes ahead and he writes a receipt. And in the receipt, he writes, Silber paid me. He paid me for the wine. Now remember again, I actually didn't pay him for the wine, but he's writing that I paid him for the wine. Mutter. Ultimately, again, it's mutter. Now we're going to see what's the logic of that. Now again, the logic behind that is as follows. Since Akum has written that Silber's paid him for the wine, which means it's mine. Because it's mine, I could go in and out and take it as I please. Because I can go in and out and take it as I please, the assumption is the akum's not going to touch it because he knows that I could come and access it whenever I want. Therefore, there's a mirsus. There's a certain element of fear that's there. But again, if despite writing this receipt, the akum says, Silber, you can't touch the wine until you actually pay me. This was an actual case in Beis Shan v'asru. And Chazal, the rabbi said it was asr, which makes sense because in this case, since the akum ultimately, again, retains control over the wine, therefore we have to be concerned that he's going to go in and he's going to touch it and make it into yayin nesach. Okay, incredible. What a beautiful Mishnah. Says the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows. Be'ir shekol ovdei kochavim nami. So the Gemara says, now remember, let's go back to the first case in the Mishnah. So Mishnah said, remember what's the case? I went ahead and I made wine. I'm a Jew. We could chazer over that a couple of times. I am a Jew. So I made wine. Now the wine, the grapes, everything belongs to the akum, right? So really what happens over here is I really owe him money. I made the wine. It's kosher wine, ready to be sold to Yisrael. It's being deposited at his home. So what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said, if it's a city where ultimately, again, there are Jews and non-Jews, right? And the akum's house opens up into Rosh Hashanah, the wine retains its permitted status because the akum's not going to manipulate, he's not going to do anything with it because a Jew could see it. Now, by inference, the Mishnah says, or explicitly the Mishnah says, but if it's a city of only Ovdei Kochavim, then again, the wine is not going to be mutter. Why? Because since there's only non-Jews who are there, the akum feels free to do whatever he wants with the wine. Gemara says, 1 second. Even if there are only non-Jews in the city, after all, the ha'ika rochlin hamachzirin ba'ayaros. There are peddlers. Rochel is literally, again, like a spice peddler or a perfume peddler. There are peddlers. In other words, there are merchants who go in and out of the city. So even if the majority, even if the residents of the city are all not Jewish, there's always Jewish people cycling in and out of that city. Shouldn't that make it enough that will create a little bit of a mirsus, of a fear that the akum's not going to come touch the wine? Amr Shmuel, Be'ir sheyesh la d'lasayim b'reach. Now we're talking about a city, interestingly enough, that has a lock and literally again a crossbeam. The Rashi says over here, she'im nichnasin ba'ela b'rshus v'kol alma yadi ki ayli ba'umatzi lemekam Allah hishaita. So we're talking about essentially a locked city. So in a locked city, peddlers and merchants can't come in and out freely. Even their access is restricted. So because it's restricted, therefore, halacha l'maisa, halacha l'maisa, if it's a city that only has Gentile residents, the wine is going to be asur. I'm Rabbi Yosef. V'chalon kirsh sarabim dami. This is very interesting. So remember again, the Mishnah says that in a city where you have Jewish and non-Jewish residents, still the house of the akum has to open up into Rosh Hashanah. Now the Gemara says, by the way, that a window is like Rosh Hashanah. In other words, even if the house itself doesn't open up into Rosh Hashanah, but there's a window from the house into Rosh Hashanah, so people could see in to see what's going on, that creates enough of a fear on the part of the akum that he's not going to play around with the wine. Similarly, again, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says v'chalon. Actually, Rashi is right across. V'chalon kirshus rabim damu. Afilu bayis pasuach lechatzer. V'chalon pasuach lechatzer b'rishus rabim. Keneged pesach habayis. Keman de pasuach rishus rabim dami. So again, even if the major opening of the home doesn't open into Rishus, but you have a window that opens into Rishus rabim, ultimately, again, that creates enough of a mirsus and of a fear, and the akum is not going to play around with the wine. Similarly, again, va'ashpa kirshus harabim. If ultimately, again, if you have a garbage dump that opens up into the home, remember, apparently, again, I guess this was a norm then. People would go to the garbage dump and they would linger there a little bit. So because that people would see if the akum's home opens up into the garbage dump, people would see what's happening over there, and that would create enough of a fear that the akum is not going to touch the wine. The Gemara says, "V'dikla kirshus harabim." Similarly, again, a palm tree. Palm tree ultimately again is like some result. Now, what does that mean? It's interesting. Rashi says, if let's say again, so the akum has his house, and next door to the akum lives a Jew, and the Jew has a palm tree. So therefore, when you have a palm tree, everyone knows it's very common. What do you do with the palm tree? You climb the palm tree to get the dates. Remember again, these are not coconut trees; these are date trees. They're Israel. So it's common to get the dates. So because Yisrael is going to climb up, therefore he's going to see into the akum's home, and therefore the akum is going to be reticent to do anything with the wine, lest he be discovered by the Yisrael. But I'll say, I just want to point out like the tremendous Musar Haskell. What's happening? What do you see from here? Well, actually, let's finish up. So the Gemara says, Psik Reisha. This is very interesting. Psik Reisha. What happens? I watch this. This is not Psik Reisha like the Hilchos Shabbos. Psik Reisha, well, it is. The head was cut off. Let's say the top of the palm tree was cut off. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, there's no fruit. So because there's no fruit, therefore, does the Yisrael climb the tree or not? So pligi baravacha v'ravina chad aser v'chad shari. One says that the presence of the palm tree permits the wine in the akum's domain, and one says that it's aser. Watch this. So the Gemara says, "Man da aser I'm sorry, v'chad aser v'chad shari. Man da aser lama le desalik." So one who says that it's aser, look, if the palm tree is not growing any fruit, the Jew is not going to climb it, and therefore, if he's not going to climb it, the akum knows no one's looking into his house. The Gemara says, "Uman deshari zimna da avdile behema." Interesting. For the one who says that it's mutter, says even if the palm tree is not growing any fruit anymore, the Yisrael would still climb the tree. Why? Let's say he loses his animal and he needs to see where exactly is the animal. Therefore, he'll climb the tree in order to be able to see where the animal is. Incredible. But let's say, just want to point out now the Musar Haskell. What's the Musar Haskell? If you notice, what is it that creates the kashrus of the wine? So obviously, step one is that I'm a yid and I'm producing the wine. Step two is now the problem is that this wine is being deposited into the possession of or into the home of an akum. So pretty much bottom line is as long as other people, there are Jews in the city, and other people could see into the akum's home, either again because his home opens into Rishus Rabim, or because there's a window into Rishus Rabim, or because there's a garbage dump, or because there's a Jew next door with a palm tree. If someone sees him, at the end of the day, he's not going to mess around with the wine. Why? Because people will do things wrong. When will we avoid negative activity? When we think that someone's watching. That's bottom line. We all do averos. We all do averos. When do I muster up the courage not to do an avera? When someone else is looking. So this is the opening halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says what's the halacha that Shulchan Aruch begins with? Shivisi Hashem lenegdi summit. I place Hashem before me at all times. Why? Because the secret to spiritual success is God awareness. In the Mishnah comments, he says if a person would only realize that they are always in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Mishnah says that a person behaves so differently when he's in the presence of the king than when he's not in the presence of the king. Both say we just sometimes make the fatal flaw of thinking that just because we can't see the Ribono Shel Olam means that he can't see us. But the privilege that we have, the privilege is that we live in the presence of God at all times. And at all times literally means at all times, in the boardroom, in our business, in our bedroom, in our intimate lives, anything and everything we do takes place in the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam. So an akum shifts his behavior when he knows that he's being watched. Chevra, we have to be mindful of our behavior because we're being watched as well. Not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is watching us in order to go ahead and find our flaws. This is so important. It's not that, oh, I got you. It's almost as if like if you ever go with you take young children to swim, a pool or a beach. What does every parent do when their child is swimming? You're watching your child like a hawk, right? Not because you're looking to see them mess up, because you love them. You want them to be safe. You want them to be secure. So when we say Akash Baruch Hu watches us, he doesn't watch us so he could catch them, say, like for a gotcha moment. That's not why he watches us. He watches us because he loves us, because he cares about us, because he sees us swimming in the ocean of life. And if we get ourselves into trouble, he wants to know it so that he could be there to swoop in and to bail us out as he does countless times that we know about, times that we don't know about. But it's important for us to remember that we live in the presence of the Ribono Shel Olam. And if an Akum modifies his behaviors when he knows that he is being watched, how much we have to modify our behaviors when we know that our loving, devoted, and doting Father is watching us every moment of every day as well. Incredible. Let's go back to Tana Abanon. The Gemara goes weiter. Such good Gemara. Tana Abanon. Echad halokeach ve'echad hasocher ba'is bechaser sha'oved kochavim. It's an interesting case. So again, I am going ahead and either purchasing or renting a home in the chutzner of an akum. So remember, I will say the way their domiciles was set up is you had a chutzner, a courtyard. And if you can imagine, that was like there was like a central courtyard, and multiple homes opened up into that courtyard. So the chutzner is owned by the akum. And I, the Yid, am renting or purchasing a home in that chutzner. And what happens? I go ahead and I fill up the home with wine. The Yisrael darba also chutzner. And ultimately, again, there's another Jew who lives in that chutzner as well. So what's halacha? And I'm both saying now, again, once again, this is a case where I'm depositing the wine with the akum. That's the case. I'm depositing the wine with the akum. Just the difference is there's another Jew who lives in that chutzner. So what's the halacha? Mutter. The halacha is that the wine is mutter. Right? And even though, again, that Jew does not have a key or there's no seal on the wine, the presence of the Jew, the mere presence of the Jew in the chutzner is enough to allow the wine to remain mutter. We'll say Amud Beis, 61b. However, again, if the Jew lives in a separate chatzar, so ultimately, again, if the Jew lives in another chatzar, then ultimately, again, if the Jew has the key to where the wine is being kept, and there's a chosem, or there's a chosem, right? There's a seal on the wine. Ultimately, again, the wine is going to be mutter. Okay. Next case. So similarly again, if you have, this was the previous case we had before. I'm producing wine for the akum. But the goal over here is to be able to sell this wine to a Jewish consumer. But the wine is being deposited in the reshus of the akum. The Yisrael darba osa chaser, and a Jew lives in that very same chaser with the akum. V'hu shemafteh v'chosim biyado. Ultimately, again, and he has the key, or there's a seal on the, and there's a seal, or there's a seal on the wine. Ultimately, again, the wine is going to be mutter. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Latana. Tani afapi she'in maftev achosim biyado mutter. No. Rabbi Yochanan said, no. If the Yisrael is living in the same chutzner, even if he doesn't have the key or there's not a seal on the wine, it's still going to be mutter. Why? Which makes sense. The presence of the Yisrael, by definition, prevents the akum from doing anything he's not supposed to do. Incredible. So the Gemara says, afapi she'in maftev achosim biyado mutter. Bechatzra acheres. But however, let's say the Yid, the Jew, is not living in the same chutzner as the Akum. He's living ultimately again. Oops, sorry about that. Sorry. But let's say again, he's going ahead and he's living in the same chutzner. I'm sorry, a little bit of a technical detail over here. So Gemara says, however, let's say Rabbi Shmuel Silber, mutar halacha l'maisa, even if at the end of the day, right, if the Jew is living in the same chutzner, ultimately, again, even if he does not have the key or he does not have ultimately, again, a seal, it's going to be mutar b'chutzner acheres. But if the yid is in a different chutzner, afa pisha mafteach v'chosim biyado. Ultimately, again, if he's in a different chutzner, even if the key and the chosim is in his adar meir. The chum say, chum osrin, achi shomer yosef u'mishamer, or achi yavel mamona haba likitzin. But the chum say that ultimately, again, the wine is going to be aser until when? Ultimately, again, either up until the time that a shomer comes, achi shomer yosef u'mishamer, until a watchman comes, or until someone who comes for appointed times comes to watch the wine. Now we'll see exactly what that means. The Gemara says, Chachamim ahia. So what are the Chachamim commenting on over here? What exactly are they commenting on? So the Gemara says, Ilema as-seifa, if we say ultimately again that they are commenting on the seifa, Tanakama nami mesar. Ultimately, the Tanakama also says that it's asar, k'mesar ka'asar. Ve'ala areisha. Unless he's talking about the first case. The Gemara says, 1 second. Ve'ala areisha, the seifa. Sorry, the second part of, or I should say, the beginning part of the seifa. I have a haka amar le, l'Rabbi Yochanan, litana tani afapi she'in maftech v'chosim biyado. But Rabbi Yochanan said to the Tana, excuse me, that go ahead and explain this, even if ultimately he does not have the key or the seal. Ve'ela as-seifa d'reisha ka'amar. Rather, again, ultimately, he's talking about the end part of the Reisha. The Kamar Tanakama, the Chatzar Acheres Mutar. Tanakama says that if the Jew is living in a different Chatzar, ultimately, again, it's going to be Mutar. V'hu shemafteach v'chosem biyado. But that is, in other words, if the Jew is not in the same Chatzar, ultimately, again, as the akum, then again it's only mutter if he has the key or there's a seal. The chum say the olam aser at she shomer yosef u'mishamer o at she yavo mamona habal lekitzin. The chum disagree. They are going to say no. Even so, again, even if the Jew is in a different chutzner, even if he has the key or there's a seal, that's not enough until there is a shomer. Ultimately, again, who comes at appointed times. So the Gemara says, 1 second. Mamona, first white line, both sides, Samachalon base. Mamona about Kitzin, Gariusehi. If there is a shomer who comes at appointed times, that's actually detrimental. Or both say, if it's clear that he comes only at certain times, then the akum knows exactly when he's coming. Ella, Achiyava Mamona She'eno Balakitzin. Rather, the way you have to say it is that halacha l'maisa, we're talking about a situation where there's a guard who doesn't come at appointed times, i.e., he comes whenever he wants. Okay, I will say we'll finish up this sugya, then we'll see what the Rambam has to say about all of this. Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer, Rishus Ovdei Kochavim Achasi. Now remember again, remember in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Elazar made this cryptic statement that all of the domains of an akum are considered to be one. So Gemara says, Rabbi Shimon Elazar lahakel or lahachmir. Rabbi Shimon Elazar coming to be mekel or machmir? Is he coming to be more lenient or more stringent than the Tanakama? So Rabbi Huda Amar Zeiri lahakel. Rabbi Huda said the name is Zeiri is coming to be mekel. Rabbi Nachman Amar Zeiri lahachmir. It's going to be machmir. So let's analyze this. Rabbi Huda Amar Zeiri lahakel is coming to be lenient. How so? V'achi kamar zera means to say v'achi kamar Tanakama kishem shebirshus so aser kach birshus oved kochavim achar nami aser. So listen to this. Rabbi Huda says the name is here like this. Tanakama says like this. In the same way that ultimately, again, Shibir Shusa Aser, same way that if it's in the Rishus of the Akum, right? The owner Akum. And again, all the qualifications. There's no Yisrael in the cities, and ultimately, again, the city is not, and his domain doesn't have Shirabim, that's going to be Aser. The same halacha is true if the wine is deposited in the home of another Akum. In other words, Tanakama was like this. Whether the wine is deposited in the home of the Akum owner or in a different akum, either way, it's going to be aser. Why? Chashinan legomlin. Ultimately, again, we are chushesh for reciprocity. I will say, the truth is, before we go on, let me show you a very important Rashi over here. Look at Rashi, lahakel O lahachmir. It's almost right across in Rashi where we're up to. Rashi says lahakil lahachmir. Lahakil the kamar tanakama. Be'ir shekula ovdei kochavim aser lanicha bebeis ovdei kochavim. Shehu bailov. V'odin bebeis ovdei kochavim acher. So again, for example, right? So watch this. So we're trying to figure out what exactly is Rabbi Shimon Elazar saying. So the Tanakama holds like this. If you have a city that is all akum, right? So halacha l'maisa, you can't, in other words, then the wine is going to be aser. And that's true whether you place the wine in the home of the akum who is the owner, or you place it in the wine of the akum, ultimately again, who's not the owner. Either way, it's going to be aser. The Gemara says, "V'kamar b'Shimon Elazar v'chi kol reshus ovdei kochavim achasi b'tmiya kilamar hol ve'ino b'beis bailov mutar tahai ovdei kochavim mirsas." Olahachmir kamar obenichuse itmar the Tanakama dafka bebais balav kamar vasrib Shimon Elazar lemeimar v'wadim bebeis ovid kochavim achar techashin legomen. So we'll say here's the shaila. The position of the Tanakama is like this: when you have a city that is all akum, right? So then halacha l'maisa, the Tanakama says the wine is aser, and the Tanakama doesn't make a distinction whether the wine is being placed in the home of the akum, who is the owner of the wine, technical owner of the wine, or a different akum. So the shaila is, what is Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar saying? Is Rabbi Shimon Elazar ultimately, again, is he agreeing, or ultimately, again, is he being more makel? So now let's go back to the Gemara. So the Gemara is like, Tanakama. Tanakama is like this. Tanakama is like this. In a city where it's all akum, whether you deposit that wine in the home of the akum owner or in a different home of an akum, the wine is going to be aser. Regardless, the wine is going to be aser, right? What does it mean, chashin legomen? Chashin legomen says like this, that remember, the akum owner says to the other guy, listen, you know what? I can't make this wine yayin nesach because all eyes are on me, but you can make it yayin nesach. And then the next time a Jew deposits wine, you could also give it to me. I'll make your wine yayin nesach. So therefore, there's yayin nesach reciprocity between the two of them. So that would be the position. Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer Medar, when is it so? Bershu so only mizrashos. Ava bershus ovi kochavim acher mutter. And then Rabbi Shmuel Silber perhaps comes along and says, no, the only time that it's in a city where it's kulo akum, where it's all akum, the only time the wine is aser is in the domain of the owner. But in the domain of someone else, we're not concerned that this secondary akum is going to make the wine into yayin nesach. There's no concern about collusion or reciprocity. Rav Nachman Amar Zeiri lahachmir. No. It's going to be machmir. Tanakama. Tanakama is like this. When is this? So Medar Amurim Bershuso. Perhaps Tanakama says like this. When do we have to be choshish? When do we have to be concerned, ultimately, again, that in a case where it's a city kula akum, that the own akum is going to make the wine into yayin nesach? That's only if it's placed in the home of the owner. But for a different akum, we don't assume that a stam akum is going to make wine into yayin nesach. And therefore, again, the Gemara says, why? We're not concerned about reciprocity. Rabbi Shimon Elazar Omer Kol Rishus of the Kochavim Achasi. Rabbi Shimon Elazar, on the other hand, says he disagrees. He says no. He says rather all of the Kochavim are considered to be like one Rishus, and therefore Allah Chalamaisa, the wine is going to be aser no matter whose domain it is deposited in. So that's the two versions of Shimon Elazar. So Tanya Kavasti Rav Nachman Amar Zeiri Lahachmir. We have a brisa. That's the part of Nachman name is here. He said it was Nachman. Rabbi Shimon Elazar, Kol Rishus of the Kochavim Achasi. Every domain of an akum is considered to be one domain. The Gemara says Mipnei Haramoin. Ultimately, again, because we are concerned about collusion and reciprocity. Good. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says Debei Parzak Rofila Osivu Chamra Gabe Arsayu. This is an interesting case. So we'll say we've actually had this name mentioned before. Parzak was the guy's name. Rofila means he was an official who was second in command to the king. So one time this guy Parzak deposited wine with a sharecropper. With the sharecropper. Rashi says over here, Yain kosher dezamni Yisrael ba'ashroi. So this is this same case. So Parzak had Jews who created wine, who made wine. They deposited the wine back with Parzak. Parzak went ahead and deposited it with a sharecropper. So now what's the status of the wine? So the Gemara says, Ki chashin legom l'hanin yilehechad deka mosif hai gabe hai. What do we have to be concerned regarding collusion? or reciprocity when there's the possibility of reciprocity. However, again, avahacha keven da arise lav darka laosve be parzak rofila, and therefore the gomel lo chashinon. But in this case over here, where there is not a lateral relationship, or rather, again, there's parzak, who is like the second in command to the king, and his sharecroppers. So it'd be common for him to deposit wine with them. It would be uncommon for them to deposit wine with him, and therefore halacha lamaisa. Perhaps we could say in that case that there is no concern ultimately again for collusion, and therefore the wine shouldn't be yayin nesach. Amalu Rabba says as follows: Adrabah, afilaman amar lo chayshin legomlin. Even according to the opinion that says that normally we're not choshesh for reciprocity, hani mili hecha de lo mirsas mine. That's only where there's no fear. Aval hach akeven the mirsas mine mechape ale zechusa. Both in this case is worse, the Gemara says, since these are the sharecroppers of Parzak Rufila, ultimately, again, we have to be concerned like this. Parzak could come in, he could do whatever yain nesach he wants to do with the wine, and guess what? The sharecroppers aren't going to say anything. Why won't they say anything? Because they're afraid of him. So in this case, he really could do whatever he wants unchecked, and therefore there should really be a significant concern about yain nesach. Amar luhu Rava. Rava said, Adirabba. Oh, good. So the Gemara says, fine. Good. Hahu, the Gemara says, Hahu kirava. Sorry, Hahu karcha. Excuse me. The Hava Yosef be Chamra di Yisrael. There was a particular city which housed kosher wine, Jewish wine. So the Gemara says, Ishtachach oved kochavim dahavikai bene dani. And they found an akum standing between the barrels. Amarava, so the shaila just is, so now obviously the shaila is, what do we say? Like, do we have to be concerned about yayin nesach or not? So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, Amarava, im nitfas alav kiganov chamra shari v'ilo aser. If at the end, if you look at Rashi, second to last line in Rashi in the parak, im nitfas kiganov im oved kochavim chalashu v'yesh emas shoftei ha'ir alav v'mitzum nogea nitfas kiganov. So if this is a city where there's Jewish strength, and therefore, again, if they were to find the akum touching the wine, he would be judged as a ganov. Then einachinami, in that case, the wine is going to be mutter. Rashi's chamar shari. So essentially what it's saying is like this. If the akum knows that there's going to be recourse against him, if he goes ahead and he touches the wine, in other words, they're going to treat him like a thief, and therefore, again, they're going to make him liable, then we could assume that he's not going to touch the wine. But if halacha lamaisa, he could touch the wine, and there's absolutely no ramifications for it, then the wine is going to be aser. So I'll say, so just by the way, I just want to share with you just the Rambam on this. That's the end of the paragraph, just the Rambam. So the Rambam passed me like in Hilchos Ma'acholos Hasuros, Parak Yud Gimel, Halacha Vav. Here we go. Akum shesachra Yisrael lidroch lo yena betara. Kidei shemuter Yisrael veikachom mena v'haya bebeso sha'akums. This is our case. An akum hired me to make kosher wine that he could then sell to Jews. But the wine is being housed in the house of the akum. So what's the status of the wine? Im ha Yisrael zeh sheshomra yain darba osa chatzar yain muter. If I live in the same chatzar as the akum, then the wine is going to be muter. My mere presence prevents the akum from tampering with the wine. Good. Vim haya shomer dar bechatza acheres hayayin aser. Ultimately, again, but if I live in a different chatzar, ultimately, again, the wine is going to be aser. Why is the wine will be aser even if the Jew has the key and there is a seal. Shekevan shayayin shal akum birshusa ena mafachi lezayf lekanis labayis yomer v'hima imeidu bam lo yichus. This is very interesting. So remember again, in this case, essentially the halacha is like this. If the wine is being made by the Jew, so it's kosher, but it's being deposited with the akum, but it's in the akum's house, and therefore the akum could do whatever he wants. If I live in that chatzar, that creates a mirsus. My presence creates a fear for the akum, and he's not going to tamper the wine. But if I don't live in that chatzar, then at the end of the day, the concern is that akum is going to do whatever he wants. Even if I have the key, and even if there's a seal, ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, the wine is going to be aser. Now the Rambam does go on to the next halacha and he says as follows: that if the akum does this thing where he writes me this receipt, right? The Gemara talks about this case where he says it's as if you've paid me already for everything, right? Ultimately, again, then halacha l'maisa, He says, "Afilu kasav akum leisoshin is kalameno hamos." Actually, no, we'll leave that case aside. Let me just say the last case. Haya yain ze'atar sha'akal munach b'rishus harabim o b'bayis ha'psol rishus harabim v'yisrael ochem v'sham motar shalach nes. Now, again, I will say now one more point that is important over here, which is that halacha l'maisa. If the wine is in the home of the akum, and as we said before, the home opens up into Rishus Harabim, and this is a city ultimately again where Jews and non-Jews live, then under those circumstances, the wine is going to continue to remain mutter. Okay, Vosa, incredible. We will stop over here for today. What I'm going to record separately is Rashi. If you know Rashi, there's something fascinating about Rashi over here. Rashi goes ahead and Rashi points out, I don't remember seeing this before with Rashi. I'm sure it still has happened. Is that Rashi gives a little synopsis on the halacha l'maisa. Ultimately, actually, you know what? Let's take a look at it now quickly. We'll just go through it quickly. Mir Hashem. Actually, no, I'm going to record it separately. We'll do it separately because it's a little bit of a longer piece. But Rashi goes through essentially what is for Rashi the halacha l'maisa. Now we will see in Meretz Hashem that Rashi's halacha l'maisa is a little bit different than our halacha l'maisa, but nevertheless an incredible piece and important to understand. We'll stop over for today. Wishing everyone a wonderful day and such a good feeling with all of you.